Okay, friend, I think it's time we had some real talk. I hear so many people debating whether or not they should start selling on Etsy. There are a lot of things floating around that have been causing concern for those considering starting an Etsy shop. A lot of people say Etsy suspends shops for no reason, that there's hidden fees, you can't collect email addresses on Etsy, and we're all just kind of left here wondering, is that really true? Well, that is a totally valid question, and these are valid concerns and ones that definitely need to be clarified, especially for those considering selling on Etsy. So today I'm addressing the top 4 concerns I hear about Etsy head on so we can discover what's actually true. Let's go. All right, let's first address one that I hear all the time and really is intimidating for a lot of people considering selling on Etsy, and that is that they've heard Etsy suspends shops for no reason. So there's no question that Etsy has been suspending more shops the last few years on a more regular basis, but the question is, are they really doing this for no reason and just picking random shops to suspend, or what's actually behind all of these shop suspensions that we've been hearing about? I like to get everything as straight from the source as possible, so let's check out Etsy's article that actually addresses this. So here on the Etsy website, they state that Etsy suspends accounts when we have reason to believe our policies have been violated, when shops have an overdue bill, and when shops haven't submitted information or completed steps that are required so that Etsy can comply with security measures and/or applicable laws. So right off the bat here, Etsy is saying we have specific reasons for suspending shops, and it has to do with possible violations of policy, overdue bills, or incomplete steps in your setup for your shop that Etsy requires. This article goes on to say that if something is happening with your shop, you could have one of 3 things going on. You could have a specific individual listing or listings removed, you could have a temporary suspension, or you could have your shop permanently suspended. It states that if you have a temporary suspension, you should receive an email from Etsy with some information on why your shop was suspended and what you can do to get it reinstated. But if for some reason you don't get that information from Etsy, you can always come here to this article and look at what they list as the most common reasons for shop suspensions and try to identify which one of these could apply to your shop without you maybe even realizing it. Here Etsy is saying some of the most common reasons for shop suspensions are an overdue bill, missing taxpayer ID in your shop, which is referring to how Etsy requires sellers in the US to have a taxpayer ID on file. You could be missing bank account information in your shop. You could have an unfinished bank account verification, so if you haven't completed your verification of your bank account, that could be a reason. They also state that one reason is problems with identification verification. So it says when you're setting up a shop, Etsy will ask for information to verify your identity. If they have trouble verifying your identity, they may ask for more info. If they continue to have trouble, your account may be suspended until they can verify your information. So it's important that you check for emails from Etsy, even in your junk and spam folders, to learn about verifying your information for Etsy payments. Another reason listed here is that the seller info confirmation is needed, which they go on to explain that Etsy is contacting some sellers to provide and confirm seller info within a legally required deadline. Applicable shops that don't confirm by the deadline are placed on pause by an Etsy-initiated vacation mode. So you want to make sure to check your shop manager dashboard or check your email again to make sure that you've confirmed everything that Etsy needs you to. And lastly, here we see repeat policy violations. Now this can be a tricky thing because Etsy does have specific policies that they expect all of their sellers to abide by, but if you haven't read through what they call their house rules, which is the seller policy, you maybe wouldn't know of some of these policies and you could be violating them without even realizing it. So the best thing to do is to read through Etsy's seller policy to get really familiar with what they expect of their sellers and ensure that your shop is not even accidentally violating anything. Now, all the articles that I mentioned in the video today, including that shop suspension article and the Etsy seller house rules, are going to be linked in the video description below in case you'd like to click through and read the articles for yourself. But here we can see Etsy's seller policy. We've got things like their community policy, intellectual property policy, privacy policy, handmade policy, fees and payments. So it's important that you understand what goes into all of these different policies. But a few that I've seen commonly violated without the sellers really realizing it are the intellectual property policy and the handmade policy. Now, I do have to give a disclaimer that I am not a legal professional, so nothing that I say in this video should be taken as professional legal advice. You definitely need to click through on these policies and read them for yourself so you can understand what they say. But in general, the intellectual property policy is talking about how you are not allowed as a seller to sell anything that infringes on someone else's intellectual property, referring to copyrights and trademarks. So it's really important, especially if you're planning on putting certain phrases on your products, that you check for a trademark to make sure that the phrase, words, or graphics that you're planning on using for your products are not trademarked or copyrighted, because if they are, then you'd be violating Etsy's intellectual property policy. And in essence, essence stealing someone else's work to make money off of it. There are phrases that are commonly used but that are trademarked that you might not even ever realize unless you specifically look it up. So the best way to start with this kind of research is to go to uspto.gov. That's the US Patent and Trademark Office website where you can do a trademark search for whatever you're thinking of to see if it's actually trademarked or if it's available for use. You might be surprised to find that the phrase you're thinking of is actually already trademarked and you're not allowed to use it. So I definitely do this kind of trademark research before you ever even create your products, but if you already have a shop going and you think you might be in danger for this type of violation, I definitely recommend you double check and go on the trademark search website to make sure that you're not violating this policy. Now, another one of the policies that might be accidentally violated is the handmade policy. So we can see here under Etsy's handmade policy that when you're selling items on Etsy in the handmade category, you have to be considered either the maker or the designer of the item. If you're not considered the maker or the designer of your item, it doesn't qualify as a handmade item and you'll have to sell it in a different category. Now, there are other categories. So let's say you sell something like a vintage item. You are not the maker or designer of that item, but because it's a truly vintage item, meaning 20 years or older, you can sell that on Etsy under the vintage category. But if you list a product under the handmade category, you need to be able to show that you're either the maker or the designer, meaning that you're the one that actually handmade that item, or you designed the item and you worked with a production partner that you've disclosed openly on your Etsy shop to produce that item. Again, you can read this handmade policy all the way through to understand a little bit further what actually entails a maker or a designer, but it's important if you're listing items in the handmade category to make sure that you're not violating this policy even unknowingly. It also talks about how Etsy expects you to disclose your production assistance and to be completely transparent about how your items are made. There are a lot of different policies to be familiar with as an Etsy seller, and I know it can feel intimidating, but you definitely want to put in the effort up front to make sure that you're understanding and abiding by these policies and making sure that your shop is good to go in every other way, including not having an overdue bill and all of the other common issues that we mentioned before. So from my research and what I've seen, I personally don't agree with a theory that Etsy just shuts down random shops for no reason. What I will say is that a few years ago when the pandemic happened, Etsy grew by leaps and bounds in numbers of both shoppers and sellers. So there were a lot of new sellers coming on the platform, and Etsy had to do something to up their game to protect the users of the platform from those who were coming on as fake sellers and trying to just order already manufactured items and sell them on Etsy when they didn't fit into any category that Etsy has, like vintage or handmade. So in Etsy's attempts to protect the users a little bit better and vet new sellers, they did come up with some automated systems that would give them red flags if there was a new shop that gave any kind of warning signs about the possibility of it being a fake or dishonest seller. Unfortunately, I do think some legitimate sellers who are coming onto the platform get swept up in that with the Etsy bots that are producing these red flags sometimes, and we'll have to go through the process of possibly appealing a suspension or contacting Etsy support to see why their shop might have been suspended. But usually if it's been by accident, Etsy support is good about helping get that shop reinstated, and it shouldn't be a big issue. So if for some reason you've had multiple suspensions or you've been notified of a permanent suspension, chances are you've probably left a part of your shop setup incomplete, or you've got an overdue bill, or you've violated a policy without even realizing it. All right, moving on to concern number 2 that I hear all the time, which is that Etsy has hidden fees. This is a little bit more of a cut and dry answer, as I can tell you that Etsy definitely doesn't have any hidden fees, and they don't try to hide or deceive sellers by not announcing what the fees are. They are clearly disclosed and explained on their website. So again, if we come to Etsy's house rules, you can check out the fees and payments policy. I'll have that linked below as well. But this clearly explains what types of fees you are expected to pay as an Etsy seller. So there are several different ones, but keep in mind that not every single fee applies to every seller. The few that will apply to every seller are the 20 cents listing fee. So this means that you'll be paying 20 cents for each new or renewed listing. The transaction fee, which is 6.5% of the price you display for the listing every time it sells. So that only comes out when you make a sale. Shipping fees, of course, if you are selling physical products, you get to set these, but you need to take into account that you are going to be shipping things and paying for shipping if you sell physical products. And then you've got your payment processing fees if you use Etsy payments, which most sellers do. There are several other fees which only apply in certain circumstances or for certain sellers. So you can definitely look through these as far as Etsy ads fees, offsite ads fees, fees for Etsy pattern if you decide to have that. But in general, a lot of these are optional for what you decide to actually add on to your basic Etsy plan. So it definitely would help to read through this policy. And I also have a whole video that I've made explaining each of these fees in depth so that you can gain a better understanding understanding of what you're coming into as an Etsy seller. So I'll go ahead and link that video in the description box as well in case you'd like a more in-depth dive into what these fees mean. But the short, cut and dry answer is that no, there's nothing hidden. Etsy does disclose everything that you are paying as a seller. And unfortunately, you're not going to find any kind of marketplace platform to sell on online that doesn't have some kind of fees. Whether you choose to sell on Etsy or Amazon or eBay, you're always going to have either a transaction fee or a monthly payment to use that service. Even with owning your own website using a platform like Shopify, you're going to have some kind of fees that are coming out at some point. It's just what we have to accept as online sellers, that we are using their service, and we have to decide, are these fees worth the fact that they are providing a whole service to us, including payment processing, including a search engine where our listings can be found, direct access to millions of shoppers. So in my opinion, it's best to just accept the fact that there are going to be fees associated with being an online seller, and from there determining which of these platforms is best for the spot that I'm in, the season I'm in as a seller, what's going to help me get that momentum I need. So when it comes down to it for me, I think the Etsy fees are more than doable to build into your pricing for everything that you get by being an Etsy seller and having access to all of those organic millions of shoppers that are already shopping on the Etsy platform. And that brings us to concern number 3, which is that the Etsy market is too saturated for me to break through. It is true, like I mentioned before, that a few years ago, Etsy really skyrocketed, took off, and had extremely high numbers in growth when it came to having more sellers and shoppers on the platform, which of course with more sellers means more saturation, but it also grew in demand as well because Etsy was becoming more of a household name. A lot more people were becoming aware of it and choosing to shop on the platform. So on the one hand, we've got increased saturation with a lot of new sellers, but on the other hand, we've got increased demand with a lot of new shoppers. Now, I know market saturation can feel really intimidating when you're thinking about all the other sellers who are selling something similar or selling something in your same niche, but you have to remember that having competition is actually a good thing. It's proof of demand for the product category that you're thinking of selling in. If there wasn't demand for it, no one else would be choosing to sell in that category. Not only that, but we can see proof that there are new shops popping up all the time that are making consistent sales and having success. Take these few shops that I found, for instance. These have been on the Etsy platform for less than a year or two and have already made tons of sales, tons of revenue, and are having a consistent monthly income from their shop. Now, is it easy? No, definitely not. It takes smart strategy, it takes implementing the right tactics, and it takes hard work. But you absolutely can get there, and it absolutely is possible to break through the market saturation if you have a good plan in place and you understand things like how the Etsy algorithm works, how to get your shop discovered, how to optimize both your individual listings and your whole shop. Now, if you're listening to those and you're thinking, I have no clue how to do any of that, well, I got you covered because I have a free Etsy success guide that you are more than welcome to download after you watch this video. It's completely free to you, and it's just a bullet point list of how to get started quick with smart strategy when you're opening up your Etsy shop. So I've got that linked in the video description below in case you'd like to download that and follow the steps to get everything optimized really well from the beginning. Another thing that I like to think of when I'm getting a little bit intimidated by looking at what appears to be a really saturated market is the fact that a lot of people are just coming on Etsy and throwing up stuff and basically guessing with putting up their listings. They're guessing on what type of product they're selling. They're guessing on what type of product photos will work well. They're not putting any thought into using highly searched keyword phrases to optimize SEO for their titles, their tags, their description. This is what I'm talking about when I'm referring to smart strategy. A lot of people are not even aware that they need to be thinking about these things. So even though when you look up your niche on Etsy and it might seem like there are thousands of sellers to compete with, really you have to remember that the real competitors who are putting in the work and putting smart strategy into place, that number is a lot smaller, which makes it a lot easier to comprehend being able to come in as a competitor. Just the fact that you're here researching, looking up smart strategy and tactics to get started with your Etsy shop well already puts you well ahead of the game. All right, let's go ahead and tackle concern number 4, which is I hear people saying that Etsy doesn't allow you to collect email addresses. So one thing we should all be thinking of as business owners and online sellers is growing our email list, because we know that email marketing has the highest ROI or return on investment investment when compared to things like social media marketing. Both are great, but if you had to choose one or the other, you should definitely be focusing on getting your email list going from the very beginning, as that's going to drive the most sales. So people who know this are a little bit concerned when they hear the possibility that Etsy might not allow you to collect your customers' email addresses to add to your growing list. So let me clarify and make sure that we understand what the policy is. It's true that Etsy does not allow you to automate collecting every single buyer's email address. So if you have a customer come in and purchase something from your Etsy shop, there's no way on the Etsy platform to automatically collect that customer's email address and add it to your list. There's actually good reason for Etsy doing this, as it would violate certain email laws that exist in terms of the email address holder voluntarily opting in for your list. An automated collection like that might actually turn out to be illegal, which nobody wants. So Etsy does not allow that for sellers, but there is a workaround in a way that you can still build your email list through your Etsy shop. And this is to create a lead magnet or a freebie of some kind. It's something that you're giving your potential leads for your email list for free in exchange for them agreeing to sign up for your list. So they are now volunteering on their own accord to sign up for your email list in exchange for getting whatever that lead magnet or that freebie is. So it could be a coupon code for free shipping, or a coupon code for 50% off, or a free digital download of some sort. But you can easily create that free lead magnet, get it set up through your email service provider with a landing page, and then post the link or the URL to that landing page in your Etsy shop in strategic places like your shop announcement, your listing descriptions, and your about section. You can say something like, hey, get 50% off when you sign up for my email newsletter here. That way they'll hop over to your landing page, voluntarily sign up for your newsletter, and get a freebie in return. This is completely okay with Etsy, and you are definitely allowed to post a link to your landing page in different spots in your Etsy shop to be smart about growing your email list. So in a way, does Etsy allow you to automate collection of email addresses? No, but you are able to grow your list through some smart email marketing strategy with freebies, lead magnets, and landing pages. So if these are all valid concerns, then where do we go from here? Well, everyone's going to have a different opinion, but my personal opinion, and the thing that I think is best, especially for new sellers, is to start on Etsy to get some momentum, get some traction going with your sales, and then eventually and slowly pivot into owning your own e-commerce website and branching out into some different spaces like selling on social media and possibly even locally. Etsy is an amazing starting point for some of the reasons that I mentioned before, the top one being that there are millions and millions of organic shoppers that love to shop on Etsy, so you can have them right there at your fingertips and more likely be discovered quicker. Now, this does come with a bit of a downside of not having full control over your shop like you do if you sell with an e-commerce platform like Shopify, and of course having to pay some of those seller fees, but I think it's an amazing trade-off because of the potential and the possibility that Etsy provides to those who have never done it before. So what I recommend is to start on Etsy, to use it to grow your momentum, and then to branch into selling with something like Shopify that you can own your own e-commerce website with. Now, like I mentioned before, no platform is going to be perfect. There's a trade-off either way you go, but I'm actually grateful that Etsy has policies and that they have cracked down on trying to vet new sellers, because it truly does protect all of us users, whether we're buyers or sellers using the platform. We can be sure that Etsy is being really proactive in trying not to let a lot of fake or dishonest sellers on the platform, keeping the products for sale as quality as possible. Now, of course, nothing's ever going to be 100%. There still will be some that slip through, but I take comfort in knowing at least that Etsy's being proactive and they want their sellers to succeed. My husband reminded me of a quote from Nick Saban the other day where he said, "Success takes what it takes." So at the end of the day, there's really no shortcuts. You just have to do what successful people do, and that's going to be putting in the hard work, doing research to identify smart strategy and tactics that you can put into place, and building the groundwork and the foundation for expanding your business and your brand later. The smartest sellers will start on Etsy and then capitalize on the success that they find on Etsy to grow their business and scale it to the next level. So it may take paying some fees. Yes. It may take reading through some policies to make sure you're not violating anything. Yes. But at the end of the day, you will be so grateful that you did that hard work up front and that you took a chance on starting your shop. So friend, if you decide that selling on Etsy is for you and you want a good place to start, don't forget to download my free Etsy success guide linked in the description box below to get a quick start bullet point list of what you'll need to focus on first to get started on the right foot. And if you want a full walkthrough of how to start setting up your Etsy shop, then you can click or tap on the square on the screen right now, and that'll take you over to watch my step-by-step tutorial on that. Happy selling, friends!